we started talking about types of cells. How many types are there?
4. 2.
There are 2. What are they?
Macromolecules? Yeah.
So a prokaryote and a.
Eukaryote.
All right, pro means what?
No.
No. Yes, no. So that means no nucleus. What about eukaryote? It does have a nucleus. U means true. So U means true. Pro means no. So nucleus.
It should be.
What else do we know about a prokaryote?
Yes, no.
Yes. No membrane-bound organelles. Boy, sit in your chair with me. All right, and what else do we know about a eukaryote? So it has membrane-bound organelles. Those are the 2 important things. Hey, some other things that we need to know about them. Which one is bigger? Eukaryote. Which one is simpler? A prokaryote. What's an example of a prokaryote? Bacteria and a eukaryote? Yep, animals and plants. What's it? Humans, yeah. So plant, animal, and bacteria. What do both of these cells have? Yes. And what else? What else do they have? Huh? DNA. What else?
I want to say nucleic acid.
Cell membrane.
Only the eukaryote has cell wall,
They can, but
Oh, yeah.
in a eukaryote, what kind? Only plants, that's right. What else? Yep, cytoplasm.
Easy.
All right. So these 2 right here, those are the big ones, DNA and cell membrane, but they both have ribosomes and cytoplasm as well. Okay, so make sure we understand that. So that's the difference between a prokaryote and a eukaryote. So the next thing that we talked about were specific types of eukaryotic cells, and we broke this down into what? What were the examples? Plant and animal, okay? So you need to know the difference between plant and animal cells. So I'm going to give you a function, and you're going to tell me what organelle does it. And then we're going to talk about the differences. You ready? Control center. Nucleus. Matt, you with us? Protein synthesis. Ribosomes, that's right. Controls what enters and exits the cell. Storage facility. Gel-like substance that where chemical reactions take place. All right, smarty pantses. Support and structure. And what kind of cell is that found in? A plant cell, that's right. Powerhouse. Okay, so what process takes place there? Cellular respiration. And keep that in mind because we're going to talk about that coming up. up pretty soon here. This uses sunlight to make sugar,
Look,
a chloroplast. And what kind of cell do we find? Plants. Okay, so what process is that? Photosynthesis. So cellular respiration, photosynthesis are going to be coming up. Did I get them all? All right. So what's the difference between a plant cell and an animal cell? Cell wall. Yep, plants. What else? Chloroplast and one other thing. They have a large vacuole. So animal cells still have a vacuole, but they're a lot smaller. Okay. And then the last thing that we did last week was unicellular adaptations. So uni means what? One. Okay, one cell. So we talked about some adaptations for unicellular organisms. Which one is used to sense light? Eye spot, that's right, an eye spot. Okay. Pumps out excess water. Huh? Into the sea. Yes, contractile vacuole. So don't confuse that with a vacuole that we find in the plant animal cell, okay? Because it pumps out excess water. Which one is a long whip-like tail for movement? Flagella. Short hairs that are used for movement, but also can bring in food. Cilia. And this means false foot. The pseudopod. Yep, pseudopod. Okay? So make sure we know what those are. You also need to know the difference between phototaxis and chemotaxis. Photo deals with what? Light. And chemo, chemicals. Okay, there's also positive and negative. So positive means to the light, yep. And negative means to go away from the light. Same with positive and negative chemotaxis. So when we're talking about positive, negative phototaxis, anybody watch that video? What were my examples for positive and negative phototaxis? So if you were to go outside at night, you turn on your porch light, what happens? Moths.
Oh.
Moths flock to the light.
Good moth.
That's water. Okay. And what goes away from the light if you turn the lights on? Roaches. That's right. Okay.
They're
So
fast.
they go away from the light. So if you were to walk in, like, just say that there were a bunch of them in here, if you were to have the light off and then you turn the light on, they would scatter. Okay. And moths, on the other hand, they come to the light. Okay. Does anybody have questions about any of that? We feel pretty good about it. You better know it because you're going to see it tomorrow on a quiz. Okay? No. Are you sure? All right. I'm going to look it up. All right. So today we are going to talk about specialized cells and stem cells. Okay? So looking up here, what do each of these following things specialize in?
Jumping. Chocolate. Country. Country. Cars.
Well, maybe cars. That's a good one.
Oh, they're money. Oh, wait. Basket. Wrapping. I don't know. She don't specialize in anything, honestly.
Weightlifting.
I like it. I specialize in weightlifting, they said.
Where's the body?
What are you supposed to say? Biology. But I like the weightlifting.
Does she really specialize in that though?
Those are some brownie points. All right. And what about all of you?
We take turns.
Wait, bowling, I'll bowl.
You bowl? You specialize in bowling? All right. All right. So what makes cells different? And this is what their names make them different? Well,
They're what they're made of.
all right, well, we're going to talk about a bunch of different types today. So what makes cells different is how they specialize. And when we talk about cell specialization, we're going to talk about how they look different, but they all have different. What do they have? Different what? They do, because they look different, but that means they have a different what? Function. Yeah. All right. All right, so imagine this. You're building a bookshelf for your home office. You cut the wood, sand, join the pieces together, and mount it on the wall. Now imagine you only have one tool to complete the job, and that is a hammer.
Wait, you're talking about they're already sanded and they're already joined together?
No, I said you're building a bookshelf.
Oh, no. Oh, you can't.
Okay? So to build a bookshelf successfully, you need tools that are specialized for the different tasks you have to complete. Because if you only have a hammer, are you able to sand the wood?
No.
Are you able to put it on the wall? Partially, but what else do you need to put it on the wall?
Nails.
Nails, okay?
I'm gonna get beat against the wall with my work.
If you what?
Beat against the wall.
Oh my goodness. All right, I don't want no holes in my walls. All right, so as your task becomes more complex, for example, building an entire house, the tools required become even more specialized. Because we went from just putting a bookshelf up, right? Now we're building an entire house. So lots more specialization. So similarly, organisms have a lot in common with construction jobs. So as the job increases in complexity, more specialized cells are required to perform the various functions. So these are some of the different cells that we're going to look at today. We're going to look at sperm cells, muscle cells, red blood cells, okay, nerve cells. So up here's a picture of a nerve cell.
That's weird.
Those are firing right now. Muscle cells, okay, and there's different types of muscle cells found throughout the body. Up there you see a picture of a fat cell. Where did we see this before? Yes! Lipids!
What are those little black?
Did you say that, Marquise? All right, there's
What are those little black? Seeds.
huh?
The black things. The black dots. On the bottom right, or the bottom right picture. The lipid, like that's all. Part of the cell, I think. Oh my god. I think it might be the nucleus, dude.
Yeah,
The nucleus. These things. The nucleus. The nuclei. So you look at the
They're
picture.
part of the cell.
Yeah, they're the nucleus. What's that?
Cheek cell.
Oh, okay.
That's just magnified. What are those? Sperm cells? Yeah. What about here? Where do you see those words? Xylem and phloem.
In the back wall.
Keep it in mind. Keep it in mind. All right. So we're going to touch on this again, but stem cells are super important. Does anybody know what a stem cell is? They can change into different types of cells. That's right. Okay. So stem cells used to be a hot topic years ago because of all the research that they were doing with stem cells. So eukaryotic, they are eukaryotic, which means what? Nucleus, right? And they are found in both plants and animals. But stem cells are considered an unspecialized cell. So that means that they can differentiate into a specialized cell, such as a nerve cell or a heart cell, a liver, a kidney, a muscle. They can differentiate and specialize, become specialized into any type of cell. Okay? They can also remain undifferentiated in form. So if they're undifferentiated, that means that they don't have a specific job or function. Okay? So they can also divide and self-renew. Okay, we talked about cells and the cell theory and how cells come from pre-existing cells. So this means that they are capable of replenishing themselves by dividing. And we're going to talk about, once we finish up with cells and transport, we are going to talk about the cell cycle and mitosis and how cells actually divide. So in turn, this can give rise to other cells in the body. Okay, so stem cells are undifferentiated or unspecialized cells that can become any type of cell. So some sources of stem cells, and then we're going to come back a little bit later. They're derived from several sources. So they can come from embryonic stem cells. What word do you see in there?
Embryo.
Embryo. What's an embryo?
They give rise to any specialized cell.
What's an embryo?
Embryo?
Okay. So it's the unborn fetus, right? So embryonic, you know what I'm talking about now? All right. So embryos, they're thought to hold the most potential, these embryonic stem cells. So they give rise to virtually any specialized cell in the human body. Adult stem cells, however, they're found in the bone marrow, brain and blood, but are limited in potential because they're somewhat already specialized. Whereas embryonic stem cells are not, so therefore can become any type of cell. Another example, we won't get into too much detail with this, is the cord blood stem cells. Where is that? I'm talking about cord blood. Yep, the umbilical cord. Okay, so cord blood is thought to hold an enormous potential in treating disease. So a lot of times, when babies are born, they'll save this if a parent chooses, right? And then in later hopes of helping to treat a specific disease.
Oh, I remember the infant sharpener. Wow. So sharpener, who? Where? Oh.
All right. So cell differentiation and specialization. What word do you see in differentiation? Different. Okay, what does it mean to be different? Not the same. You have a pencil sharpener.
It worked.
Okay. So cell differentiation is a series of events through which stem cells develop into a specialized cell. Okay, so this is the process of turning stem cells into a special cell. So what do we say stem cells can turn into?
Specialized cells? Like what are they? Oh, a muscle cell, fat cell.
Anything. So they can turn into any type of cell, right? Cell specialization, what word do you see in there? Special. And what does it mean to be special?
Extraordinary.
Extraordinary.
It means to be marquee.
What you mean?
So different types of cells have unique structures and abilities which enable them to perform their functions efficiently. Okay? So sperm cells, neurons, xylem, and phloem. So these are just some of the many examples. All right, so specialized cells have different structures that allow them to perform unique functions. So there's over 200 different types of cells in the human body. All right. So here are some specifics. You're also going to see this in an assignment later. Okay. So sperm cells, bone cells, nerve cells, muscle cells, and blood cells. So consider if you did not have the specific cell type in your body. As you look at yourself in the mirror, would you look like yourself or would you look like a completely different organism?
Well,
What's up?
I mean, your general shape would probably be the same. Actually, not that. You look completely different. So, like, say if you have,
What's up?
Huh?
What's up?
like,
What cell type? I don't know. Let's pick one.
fat cells.
A muscle cell.
A muscle cell. All right, I like that one. Okay,
Completely
so-
different.
So you didn't have your muscle cells. You think you would look completely different.
Not
Okay.
sure. Would you be able to stand? Technically, you wouldn't really.
If they stand you up, you would.
Yeah, exactly.
Bone cells.
If you have no bone cells,
Heart cell.
So do you think you could survive without this type of cell?
or you'd be like the
Without the heart cell? No.
you'd be like the witch from the Wizard of Oz. You didn't have any bone cells.
And do you think a spider would have the same types of specialized cells as a lion? Or what about a fish and a bird? Okay. We'll look at some of these videos. So the next thing is single cell versus multi-cell. So single is how many? And multi is?
More than one.
Great. So one cell versus many cells. Single cells reproduce by dividing and budding, and we're going to talk about that when we get into mitosis. And multicellular reproduce by giving birth. In a single cell, they're identical to the parent, the offspring. And in multicellular, they're not identical because you have how many parents? Two. Okay, so
Weren't they
they
saying that women can like reproduce by themselves? It was something like that they were saying. I was really seeing it.
I don't think it's possible.
I don't know about that. All right.
Wait, I have a question. So you have all these different types of stuff, and some there's sexual stuff. Right, I'm thinking about something completely different. I'm thinking about something completely different. Okay, all right, thank you.
We'll get to that when we talk about mitosis,
I'm gonna
and
stop
then
talking.
later when we talk about
Something
meiosis.
else.
All right, so an example of a single cell organism would be bacteria, and multicellular would be humans, animals, okay, plants, which we talked about when we talked about. Eukaryote, okay? So all cells begin as an undifferentiated cell. So if they're undifferentiated, what does that mean?
They are stems.
They can be a stem cell. So that means that they what though?
They can transform into other cells.
Okay? So if they are not yet differentiated though, what does that mean?
You don't have a special dog.
They don't have a special job yet, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay? All those answers are right, but they don't have a special job. So some DNA expressions are turned on or activated, and we're going to talk about this again, causing differentiation. So DNA is responsible for triggering cell differentiation and specialization. Okay? So differentiation cannot be reversed, and keep in mind that structure determines function. Does a blood cell look like a nerve cell?
Yeah. Oh,
Does a nerve cell look like a bone cell?
no.
Okay, so structure determines
What is a
function.
bone cell?
I'll pull them up. So cells and their functions are also influenced by their history and environment. So nerve cells, Okay, nerve cells. Are used to transmit messages from one part of your body to another. Oh, I see what you're saying. All right, so they transport messages. Next are muscle cells. Okay.
Yes.
So these allow independent movement. Okay. But they also regulate biological functions such as your digestion and heartbeat. So there are skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Smooth muscles are the involuntary ones. Okay. Next are blood cells. We've talked about this word up here before. Okay. What is that? It is a protein. Very good. Okay, so blood cells have hemoglobin, which is what carries oxygen through the blood. So the thin outer membrane is to let oxygen diffuse through easily. Xylem and phloem.
That's the word.
Yep. So what do you see here?
Let me write that down. What is that word? Water. Long. Like I should up and down the.
So when we're talking about xylem and phloem, we're talking about what? A plant. Okay. So this is how sugars, glucose, yep, like glucose, and then it transports waters and minerals through the plant as well. Okay. So we've already said this, and these are just some other pictures and another way of looking at this, but there's around 200 specialized cell types, and they all have a specific function. Do they look the same? That's your bone cell. Okay, so they all look different, and they all have a different
Funnel.
Why
function.
does it look like I have a the bum cell?
That's wild.
All
right.
It look like it's hollow.
So, however, every cell in an organism contains the same DNA. Why? Okay? In the same organism. So how is this possible? And this is what we're going to talk about with gene activation. So different cell types have different parts of their DNA expressed or turned on. So for example, there's two light switches up here, right? So I have them both off. So are any lights turned on? No. What about now? What about now? Are they the same? Okay. So those switches are what determine what lights, or in this case, we're talking about genes, what genes are turned on. Okay. So nerve cells only have the nerve genes expressed. So that's why it's a nerve cell. Muscle cells only have the muscle genes expressed. So therefore, a muscle cell. So what happens is what do you say about DNA? Way back when. What do you say about it? So it has to be transcribed into what? RNA. So RNA is what leaves the nucleus and takes DNA's message where it needs to go. So is that kind of what you were talking about? Okay. So nerve cells only have the nerve genes expressed, muscle genes, blood genes, so on and so forth. So not all genes are turned on at the same time. Okay? So because different genes are expressed, different proteins are then made. And that specific cell becomes specialized. Okay? And that process of specializing is called differentiation. So do you see the same genes activated over here, turned on, as you do over here? No. Why? Because they're different cells. Okay? So, structure.
And all of them turn on at one time?
No. So, the structure and shape of a cell is because of its function or job. So, we said structure determines function. So, therefore, they all look different and have different jobs. Okay? So, what's this one?
A nerve.
Nerve cell. Okay, so they're long and wire looking because they send signals. So each of the specialized types, okay, develop from the same fertilized egg. And this is where we get back into the stem cells. So what were the two major types we talked about? We talked about three.
What?
Types of stem cells.
Differential.
What were the types? There were three of them I had on the board.
Oh yeah, there's the eukaryotic, wait.
Oh, adult stem cells. Is that?
Yep.
Or plus stem cells and
E.
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 You carry out. Embryo.
Yes, embryonic. Okay, so you've got embryonic, which those are the ones that can become any type of cell. Then you have
Adults.
adult stem cells, and those are the ones that are found in the bone marrow. Okay, and then the last one was the cord blood, which we obviously get from milk. Okay. So one of the last things, scientists have learned how to direct adult stem cells to turn them into any type of cell, and these are some possible applications. Growing organs in a lab to replace a damaged one, which is what you see. Growing new skin for a burn victim, and replacing defective insulin-producing cells in patients that have diabetes. Okay.
Wait, so they can read our organ?
That's what they try to do with stem cells.
Okay. So not hard. That's.
Like, what do you see here?
Did it work?
Huh?
Did it work?
Why is there?
Some of the things that they do work and some have not, but that's why it's been such controversy, and that was like years and years ago. That was like a hot topic.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Why is there a here? I don't know.
What did we just say? These are some possible, keep the word in mind, possible. The possible doesn't always mean that it actually happens, but these are possibilities that can
But it's possible for them to make a here.
Was that for the dude that might think?
Alright.
happen.
Now I don't have to worry
Alright, so does anybody have questions?
about
Alright, so we need to know what stem cells are, we need to know what specialization and differentiation. Okay? So a stem cell is what kind of cell? Undifferentiated cell, because it can become any type of cell. Okay? Questions?